Chapter 3. Dawn was near when the old man awoke. Fumbling for his boots, he pulled them on before he said, "There ain't much shake in me this morning, Blue." He held out one scarred, withered hand to show how steady it was, sensing the pleased tone in the old man's voice. Blue yawned and stretched. Freed from the instinct that kept him by the old man's side during the night, he trotted away. Nosing through a clump of scrub, he suddenly bristled. From the scent on the dry, parched ground, he knew that a snake was near. Creeping forward on his belly, Blue saw the snake at the same time as the reptile reared. Dog and snake poised momentarily in the hushed morning quietness. Then Blue leaped. His jaws closed on the snake's slender neck, and he felt the long, slithering coils twine around his body. Locked together, the two rolled over and over, snarling through his tightly clamped jaws. Blue rolled to a better position. Within moments, the snake was dead, with its head almost severed from its body. Unaware of the struggle, the old man was preparing breakfast. Flames flared up around the billy when he stood it in the fire. When Blue trotted back to the camp, there was a juicy smell, and he licked his jaws as the old man uncovered the buried meat. When the clay was broken away, the meat dripped with gravy. "We'll have a mouthful," the old man said, "then push on." He shared a few crumbly pieces with Blue, then stowed the remainder in the tucker bag along with the damper. Before leaving the seepage, he filled the billy. "Yesterday," he told Blue as the two left the camp, "I made a mistake. All that water and me with none in the billy." He looked down, shaking his head. There were times when he saw clearly, and this was one of them. To have walked away from the flooded gully without filling the billy worried him. "I was mad," he added, "mad as a goanna." Blue listened, pricking his ears to the varying tones in the old man's voice. They held a lightness that was rare, and Blue patted contentedly. Going past the snake, the old man's gaze was already fixed on the skyline. He saw neither the slim, scaly body nor Blue's side-turned head. Instead, he saw the crows returning from their night roost to the meat-hung tree. "They are like shadows," he told Blue, "black in the sun." Presently he reached the track and turned westward. Behind, in the haze, the crows were lost to sight. As he walked, the old man felt a spring in his legs that he had not known for some time. They seemed to be rising and falling of their own accord. His boots, too, seemed not so tight on his feet. "What it is, mate," he said down to Blue, "is that they ain't swollen. You've seen 'em, ain't yer big as drums. Now they're shrunk, like the rest o' me." He chuckled and scuffed at the sweat that was beginning to trickle down his face. The sun was climbing, brassy as ever in a cloudless sky. Man and dog felt its heat searing on their backs, yet neither noticed nor cared so long as one was close to the other. The old man, with his gaze searching the skyline, Blue with his head almost touching the old man's heels. There was a completeness between them that matched their surroundings. Near noon, the old man eased the straps on his shoulders as he left the track to trudge toward a tree. It had leafless branches that held little shade, yet a few sticks littered the ground. "This'll do us, Blue," the old man said. They were words that Blue had heard since riding in the billy when he was a pup, and he knew them distinctly. They were the familiar ones that came before food, drink, and a fire near which he and the old man would squat or lie. It meant the end for a while of the slow, restrained gait over mile after mile of dusty track. As the old man gathered sticks, Blue rolled and stretched, easing the stiffness from his legs. He had the strength to run at full speed or plunge over scrub, yet he seldom did so. Blue's strength was attuned to the old man's. After a fire was lit, the old man tipped water into his hat and passed it to Blue. "Get it into your," he said, and stood the half-empty billy in the flames. Within moments Blue had drained the hat and licked it dry. Sprawling out again, he watched the old man prepare a meal. When it was eaten, the old man lay back to rest. With Blue by his side, he dozed, and again memories of Ella and Judd flooded into a dream. Or was it a dream? The old man wasn't sure as he scrambled up stiffly. "It's funny," he told Blue, after gathering together the billy and tucker bag, "but I ain't never done that before. Had the same dream or memory comin' back again. Only this time Ella was laughin' and happy. She was with Judd, in a place like I told you about, where there was green hills and water crystal clear. They was farmin', Blue, and the wheat was as high as your ears, and bustin' full of grain. They were pleased to see us, Blue, and Ella gave us a fine old feed of real tucker, scones, meat, pie, and everything you can think of." He paused, trying to remember more kinds of food, but his memory failed him, and we sat there, Blue, just you and me, listenin' to 'em talk. Ella said she was happy, and I didn't ask her how she got there, or Judd either. He wasn't the same bloke I saw lyin' in the furrow, and there wasn't any dust on him. His face was smooth, without any signs of weather or worry. "I don't have to break horses any more," he told me, "and I've got a real fine team, the best there is. They're all great big fellers, and flowin' manes and tails. You should see 'em," he says, "goin' up the side of a hill. They leave a furrow as wide and deep as your arm." Then Ella said she wanted to thank me for droppin' in the past. She choked up a bit when she said it, Blue, and I reckon she was rememberin' the heat and the dust, or maybe Judd being dragged by the colt. But after a time the smiles returned, and when you and me left, Blue, she sort of gave us a hug. Judd held out his hand, and his grip nearly cracked me fingers. The old man chuckled as he swung the swag onto his shoulders. With Blue close behind, he trudged away to the track. that stretched ever westward. Around was the quiet of the vast and silent land. That night there was no water. Man and dog trudged on, staring around for signs, but found none. No bird in the sky, no fresh hoof tracks scarred above those of the drovers. Gradually the old man began to totter wearily. Blue padded behind, sensing there would be no water. It was dark when the old man stumbled a few yards from the track to slump to the ground. "This'll do us, Blue," he whispered, barely able to speak. "We'll find water tomorrow, I promise yer." Too tired to unroll his swag, he stretched out in the dust. Blue nestled close, encircled by a withered arm that had fed and protected him. There was no familiar blanket underneath, nor comfort of glowing fire. Yet Blue was content. The old man was near, asleep on the ground, and the night held only quietness. In the morning the old man stretched stiffly. "You're dry, Blue," he said, forcing himself upright. "And so am I. We'd best push on." Slowly he swung the blanket roll onto his shoulders and picked up the billy and tucker bag. Blue moved to his position behind the old sun-cracked boots. Away to the north, the first whirly-whirly of the day spun in a column of dust. Its pillar-like height pierced an otherwise empty sky. An hour or more passed before the old man saw a swirling dust trail in the distance. After a time he saw it was a truck coming toward them. Even when it was near, it seemed a remote and lonely thing coming from nowhere and heading into nowhere. When the truck was only yards away, it rolled to a halt. A short, burly man in khaki shirt and trousers slid from behind the steering wheel, wiping the sweaty dust from around his eyes. He stared at the old man, then at Blue, as if not sure he was really seeing them. The old man was swaying, forcing his thin body to stay upright, and Blue had crouched, ready to leap. His dry, gaping jaws made him a fearsome sight. Rubbing his stubbly chin, the driver said, "You're a bit off course, ain't yer, headin' west? The water's scarce, and it's a fair old walk between homesteads. You could die, and no one'd miss ye." The old man nodded. He had been staring at the truck, which was loaded with horse and cattle hides. There were some spare drums of gasoline, too, as well as a drum with a tap in it, which the old man judged held oil. Underneath the platform of the truck were 2 water bags, both strapped to a bar that kept them hanging in shade. They were smothered in dust, like everything else, yet damp and cool-looking. Almost too parched to speak, the old man said, "If you could give us a sup, we'd be on our way. Me and Blue's been dry since yesterday noon, I reckon." His dry tongue slurred the words, and he bent down to stroke Blue's ears. Blue looked up, scenting the nearness of water. His dry jaws quivered as the driver unstrapped a water bag and passed it to the old man. Kneeling down, the old man dished in his hat and filled the crown with water. "There you are, Blue," he whispered. "I told yer, didn't I, you'd have some tomorrow?" "Like I'm always sayin', mate, there's always tomorrow." Blue drank in great, snuffling guzzles, and as the hat emptied, the old man refilled it. At last Blue could drink no more. His ribs were distended, and he licked his jaws. Then the old man drank. Eyes closed, with his head tipped back, he slowly emptied a whole billyful of water before the truck driver said, "You two were dry all right. Empty the bag if you want. There's enough in the other one to keep me goin'." Rubbing his stubbly chin again, he wondered what else he could say or do to drive on and leave the old man and his dog seemed wrong. Yet there was no alternative, unless he could persuade the old man otherwise. He spat thoughtfully as he added, "You two ought to hole up somewhere, say Wiruna, where I'll be passin' through. There's a bore there, just outside the town. The water's hard, but right enough if you boil it. And there's wood about, so you'd have a good camp." He paused, wondering what else to say to make Wiruna attractive. "And as for the people, they're the best there is. You'd be right enough any time for a handout." While he was speaking, the driver visualized the one dusty main street of Wiruna, its dozen or so weatherboard houses, 2 pubs, and the police station. "It ain't much," he thought, "but there's someone which is more than there is out here." After refilling his billy, the old man passed back the water bag and prepared to leave. He had shouldered his swag when he said, "Yeah, sure, and thanks for the water. Me and Blue'll push on." He said the words slowly, staring first into the truck driver's eyes, then on into the hazy horizon. There was a vagueness in the gaze, and also a searching, as if there were somewhere he was trying hard to find. The truck driver saw the gaze and understood. He had seen men before trapped in their own loneliness. Fumbling in a box bolted to the rear of the truck, he pulled out some bread and cold meat. "Take this," he said, pushing the bread and meat into the old man's withered hands. "The bread's a bit dry, but good all the same. The cook on Yaramba gave it to me. The meat, too. She always sees me right whenever I'm passin' through." He closed the lid of the box, and the old man stowed the food in his tucker bag. It hung heavy in his hand as he trudged away with Blue. Behind, in the sun's glare, the driver scratched his chin before climbing up into the truck. After he had driven some miles, he thumped the steering wheel. "Can you beat it?" he said. 2 of 'em walking into nowhere. Baffled, he stopped the truck and climbed down for a final look back along the way he had come. All he saw was the limitless skyline merging with dusty scrub and plain. Out of sight as they followed the track through low-lying scrubland, the old man and Blue padded quietly, glad to be free from intrusion. In the sky, a round, brassy ball of sun glared redly. Earth, sky, scrub, man, and dog seemed molded into the one hazy color. Toward noon, a mob of kangaroos loped by in the distance. They were tall, lean beasts with heads out thrust, scenting some far goal. "Water," the old man said to Blue, "so we don't have to worry. We'll camp soon for a drink of tea and bite of tucker." Some of the words were familiar, and Blue raised his head, waiting for the more familiar. "This'll do us, Blue." The words came after the old man had trudged away from the track to a sparsely limbed tree. He said them as he lowered his swag, then stood the billy and tucker bag nearby. The treetop above had some leafy branches that gave a slight shade, but a few of the boughs were dead and brittle. Some had already fallen, and the old man broke them to build a fire. His hands were shaky, and before circling the camp, Blue crouched warily, sensing danger. There was an air of foreboding in the hushed, brooding stillness. The old man poured water for Blue, then set the billy in the fire. When the tea was made, he soaked the rock-hard damper and gave half to Blue. The remnants of the stalest meat were equally dry, yet the old man shared them similarly. Afterward, he stretched out to rest. Above him, through the tracery of a long dead, withered branch, he could see the sky. No clouds drifted to mark its brassy sheen. Even the mirages, hazy on the horizon, seemed a part of the great stillness. Closing his eyes, the old man dozed. Blue rested, head on paws, eyes widely alert. Suddenly he catapulted upright as the ground vibrated, and the big withered limb broke away from the tree. Even before it had parted from the trunk, Blue leaped to meet it. His jaws closed on a part of the branch, and he swung on it viciously, tearing with his claws. The weight and violence of his attack swung the branch to one side, and it crashed heavily, so close to the old man that he was splattered with sticks and dust. Flung clear, Blue rolled over and over, until at last he came to rest, crouched, ready to spring again. When he saw the old man was struggling up, Blue crept toward him. There was a long pause while the two looked at each other. Then the old man said, "I'm slippin', Blue, as sure as you're saved me. No man in his right senses would have camped under this tree." He glanced upward and around, then bent down to stroke Blue's head. "Yer was right, mate, like you was in the flood." He tried to think of more to say, but couldn't. His mind and tongue were numbed until they found relief in tears, scuffing them from his eyes. He shouldered his swag and gathered the tucker bag and Billy in his hands, and he trudged back to the track. Blue padded behind, the splintered tree shorn of one more branch, reared up starkly from the dust. There was a loneliness about its stark isolation. Chapter 4. The afternoon passed. Cattle and kangaroo tracks became more frequent. All were headed in the same direction, or returning from it. A mob of kangaroos, traveling in the opposite direction to those he had seen in the morning, confirmed for the old man that he was traveling on the right course. Presently, with Blue close behind, he left the track to trudge through scrub. It was dense and in places difficult to force a way through. The two were gasping when at last they broke through a thicket. Ahead of them spread a dusty plain. In its center, cattle were grouped around a long crescent-shaped waterhole. Amongst them, a few kangaroos sat upright on their tails. All were silent and still as they stared incredulously. Then the cattle bolted, horns glinting and tails swishing. They galloped toward the scrub. Amongst them the kangaroos leaped in full flight. Within minutes, all that remained was a pall of drifting dust, and the smell of startled cattle. In the distance, their hurtling bodies crashed through the spindly growth. Trudging on, Blue at his heels, the old man reached a heap of dry dead wood. "This'll do us, Blue," he said, and lowered his load to the ground. Glancing across to the water hole, he added, "You don't have to ask, mate, just help yourself." Blue yawned and stretched, looking up at the old man's face. There was a smile on its furrowed features that told of happiness, of pleasure at knowing that there was wood, water, and food in the tucker bag, enough for the next 2 or 3 days. "Yer couldn't ask more, could yer, mate?" the old man whispered, stroking Blue's ears. "You and me in this great big room, with tomorrow comin' up tomorrow." His hands were almost strong as he broke some of the dead wood to build a fire. That night there was contentment, as the old man and Blue stretched out. They had eaten bread and meat and shared several billyfuls of tea, and the old man had talked again about the past, telling Blue of life in the great brown heart of Australia 40 or 50 years ago. The words had tumbled from him in a jumble of dreams and thoughts. They were the mirages that shimmered on the horizons of his mind. His voice had gone on, lulling Blue with its cadence. At last there was silence as the old man closed his eyes. Soon he slept, and Blue lay head on paws, alert for sound or movement. In the morning the old man awoke, refreshed. Throwing off his blanket, he pulled on his boots, as he said, "Sometimes you wonder, all this talkin' lately has brought back many things. You wouldn't think, would yer, that once I was strong?" He held out his hands and stared at them, then looked at Blue as if for an answer. "I could throw a bullock by 'is tail with these hands. Now look at 'em." There was no hurt in his voice, only an acceptance. He wanted Blue to see what his hands were like now, and know what they once could do. Blue stared at the hands, then at the old man's face, before trotting away on a tour of the camp. When he came back, the old man was crouched near the fire, cutting meat and bread into slices. "I'm keepin' it light, Blue," he said, passing Blue his share to make it spin out. "We may have it rough for the next few days." His eyes clouded, then he shook his head, and a directness came back to his gaze. "I was wonderin', Blue," he said, "but don't let it worry yer. I'll be around for a long time yet." The words were strange, yet Blue sensed their reassurance. To add more to the reassurance, the old man gave his share of the meat to Blue. After the meal, the old man gathered his gear. He had decided to move to a ridge overlooking the water hole. "We'll stay the day," he told Blue, "and push on tomorrow. Up on that ridge we won't be in the way of stock comin' in to drink." The words "push on tomorrow" were familiar, and Blue followed the old man up the ridge without glancing back. Tomorrow was a day that always came following another sunset and night. The mention of stock, too, was a part of the old man's creed. He imposed on himself and Blue the discipline of the outback, a discipline that ruled the cattle, sheep, and horses, had pride of place. After them, men and dogs were at second and third position. Dogs in particular had to obey the discipline. A dog caught molesting stock, or even one wandering alone, was usually shot at sight. This was the great fear that haunted the old man's mind. During the day, thirsty mobs of cattle came in to drink. Some scented the dust-covered ashes left behind in the camp. Others peered up at the ridge before finally wandering into the waterhole to drink. They were bony cattle, feeling the pinch of drought. Sprawled in the scrub, the old man and Blue rested all day. That night, after the cattle had scattered to graze, the old man built a bright fire. Its glow spread around, outlining the scrub darkly, as if in a solid wall. "Snug, ain't it?" the old man said. "Like bein' in a room with the door shut." He made fresh tea with water brought up from the waterhole, then shared the food, 2 slices of meat and 1 of bread for Blue, 2 slices of bread and 1 of meat for himself. Afterward, with Blue by his side, he lay for a long time staring up at the sky. A few wisps of cloud, fleecy and dark, drifted along the horizon, like blankets, he thought, tattered and torn. He lifted the edge of his own blanket and spread it across Blue. "Almost asleep," he added, "like this one spread on you and me." The words were a mumble blurred together, sprawled with his head resting on the old man's hand. Blue stared into the night. Far off in the scrublands, a bull bellowed, trumpeting a mournful defiance. In the morning the old man arose before the blood-red sun tinted the sky. "We got to push on," he told Blue. "See what's doin' over the skyline." He felt well, strong almost. His feet were ready and eager to reach the track. He could feel their impatience as he rebuilt the fire, then filled the billy at the waterhole. Blue sensed the old man's eagerness and lithely encircled the camp. There was a questioning gaze in his eyes when he came back. "Yeah," the old man said. "I'm packed and ready. Just a drink and a swallow. Then we're on our way." "You're pleased, mate, so help me you are." He rubbed a hand fleetingly over Blue, then shared out a small portion of food. Soon the billy was empty, and dust kicked over the fire. Shouldering his swag, the old man trudged away from the waterhole, headed toward the track. Blue padded behind, head close to the worn old boots. Some kangaroos, on their way to drink, stared in astonishment before bounding on past. Neither the old man nor Blue paused to look back. The one gazed ahead, searching the skyline. The other saw only the tattered trousers and rhythmically plodding boots. The two reached the track as the sun came over the plains behind them. Its first rays promised the heat that was to come. The old man shifted his swag so that the straps fitted more snugly. His gaunt face upturned to the sky for a moment, and Blue looked up too. Far off, the feathery scrolls of dusty clouds reached up above the haze. They were thin and wispy, blown by a great force. Trudging on, the old man fixed his gaze on the skyline. As the hours passed, he remembered back to when he was a boy, riding his first horse. It had been a horse to be proud of, and one that had great heart. The old man wondered where it and countless other horses had gone, horses that had borne him through scrub and flood, horses that had lamed or hurt him with their viciousness, horses that had fallen and dragged him bruisingly across stone and desert. The animals came with velvety muzzles to nuzzle at his hand or snort violently, depending on their natures. Then memories came of Blue as a pup, his tiny softness curled in the billy. The old man had had a water bag then in which to carry water. Now the water bag was gone, left, perished in some bygone camp. Blue had grown until he had graduated to being carried on the old man's shoulders, balanced between the tattered swag and the thin, scrawny neck. Finally, in the pride of his young strength, Blue had trotted at the old man's heels. There he had stayed, linked by a love only death could part. As the sun rose higher, pouring down heat, the old man felt tears well in his eyes, felt a blurred numbness clouding his thoughts and driving away the memories. He wanted the future, not the past, to be spread before him. He wanted the sunset and the promise of another day, a promise for him and Blue that there was always tomorrow. Scuffing away the tears that came to his eyes, he said, "That's all I ask. Just you and me, Blue. Just you and me together." Blue heard the words and looked up to see the tears. They were a sign Blue had come to know and understand. He nuzzled the old man's hand, and the old man straightened to trudge on. Soon there was only the whispering scuffle of rhythmic paws and feet. After some hours, the old man's gaze was drawn from its westerly searching. To the south a swirl of dust showed, weaving and twisting across a vast stretch of plain. Shading his eyes, the old man judged that a truck was coming toward him. Its erratic course was caused by the fact that it was being driven across country. No road or track existed over the route it was traveling. The old man stared at the approaching truck for some moments, then turned again to his habitual gaze westward. There was water in the billy, bread and meat in the tucker bag. While this was so, he wanted neither to see nor talk to anyone. Blue heard the truck, and his hackles rose as he peered past the old man's legs. The old man said, "There ain't no need to worry, they're headin' past us." He stopped to gesture back the way they had come, but the truck changed course and came bouncing and lurching toward them. It was an old truck, battered and dusty, loaded with gasoline drums, water tanks, and all types of tools and equipment lashed securely with rope. The driver and his mate were prospectors. Their dark, weathered faces showed sheer astonishment as the truck rolled to a halt. Climbing down, the two men wiped their sweaty necks. The driver was a tall, lean man, so dusty that it was almost impossible to see whether he was dark or fair until he took off his hat. Then his black hair shone, wet with sweat, as he rifled his brown fingers through it. The other man was equally dusty, but short and lean. He had wide, flat shoulders and enormous hands that hung loosely by his side. He used them now to roll a cigarette as he peered at the old man, then down at Blue. Blue stared back, braced and ready to leap. His tail swished, beating against the old man's trousers. In a slow, unhurried drawl, the tall prospector said, "Well now, ain't you too bushed? I mean, you're out where it's tough enough to live if you've got good gear, like me and me mate." He slapped his hand on one of the water tanks, lashed to the truck. "But you ain't got nothing. So help me, I've never seen no one afoot out here before." He scratched his head and shook it as if wondering whether he was dreaming. The short prospector said, "Good gear is right, but we know what you mean." Stepping closer to the old man, he added, "What me mate says is right. A man on foot ain't got a chance. He's dead in a day without water." He stepped back quickly as Blue growled, inching forward on stiffened legs. The old man bent and slid a hand over Blue's ears. They were hot from the sun, yet pricked to a quivering tenseness. The old man was quivering too, wanting only to trudge on. A feeling of fear made his heart thump. "There's always someone," he whispered hoarsely, "always someone who says or wants this and that. All me and Blue wants is to push on to somewhere where me and him can camp." He eased the swag straps on his shoulders, and suddenly he could see that somewhere, see the flowing crystal water and green sheen of grass, where Ella and Judd had gone. Ella was there, waving a greeting. His lined old face lightened as he stared beyond the truck to a place only he could see. The two prospectors saw the look. They had seen, too, the old man's look of fear. Now they saw the happiness. And they saw, too, that Blue had lost his tenseness. He had the same expression of happiness that the old man had. Shaking his head, the tall prospector walked around to the back of the truck. As he lifted the lid of a box to peer inside, he said, "We don't say or want nothing. Somewhere to you is nowhere to us, but that don't matter. So long as you're headin' the way you want, you keep headin'. Me and my mate just drove across here to meet Mad Mick, the mailman. When we've done that, we're headin' back the way we've come. You'll have the track to yourself then, right from here on into the sunset." He pulled a hunk of damper, 2 tins of meat, and half a tin of jam from the box before he closed it. The short prospector nodded. "Sure," he said, "that's the way it is, sure enough. Mad Mick's due through this afternoon, or tomorrow mornin', dependin' on luck or the state of the track. If he has a blowout or the block runs red hot, then I'd say tomorrow mornin'. But if it is, look out. They don't call him Mad Mick for nothin'. He'll come through like the Broken Hill Express with all plugs firin'." The old man listened, but barely heard what was said. He eased the swag straps again, preparing to leave. Blue stretched, ready to follow. The two seemed poised, ready to merge into the great loneliness, when the tall prospector said, "Hey, steady on. I've put out some tucker for yer. Besides, me and my mate might as well boil the billy. You can hunker down with us and share what we've got. That way you'll save your own, especially the water." He pointed at the billy in the old man's hand. The short prospector added, "Sure, set down on your swag while we get a fire goin'. We can push on afterwards to the water hole, the one where you probably camped last night." He gestured along the track in the general direction of the water hole. "We usually wait there for Mad Mick and fill our drums. We can see 'em comin' a long way off and be on the track waitin'." Pulling some firewood off the truck, he passed it to his mate before he added, "He brings our stores and a bottle or two of grog. A man needs it to stop 'em from going mad." There was a silence. Then, while the two men prepared a meal, the tall man lit the fire. The short one spread a dusty piece of canvas. On it he set tinned meat, tomato sauce, damper, and a stack of tin plates, mugs, knives, and forks. By the time he had set meat and damper on a plate and passed it to the old man, the billy had boiled. The tall man made the tea, then stood it near the canvas. As he squatted down to reach for a plate, he said, "How's that for a feed? You wouldn't do better in Sydney, would yer? Splash on as much of the sauce as you like. We've got another half-dozen bottles." His long arms reached across the canvas as he helped himself to meat and damper. The short man was already hunkered down, with a full plate resting in front of him. Blue sensed the feeling of mateship in the two men and sprawled out contentedly. His gaze followed every move that was made by the old man's withered hands. They were shaky, yet certain of what they had to do, as they divvied the meat and damper in half. Blue was sitting up expectantly when the old man said, "Me and Blue always share and share alike, if it's right with you. If not, we'll push on. We ain't touched a thing on the plate." His voice was hoarse, choked almost. There was a sudden longing in the old man to be on his way, to be in freedom, to be able to give freely of whatever he had to give. Protectingly he put an arm around Blue. Blue nuzzled the old man's hand. For a long moment the two prospectors crouched quietly. Then the tall one said, without glancing up, "Like I said about the track, you've got your tucker to yourself. You do with it whatever you want. Eat it or feed it to your dog." "Sure," the short man agreed. "Don't let it worry her. A mate's a mate, whether man or dog. There's more here if you want another helping." He gestured around to the truck and beyond, as if explaining there was full and plenty. It helped ease some of the sadness he was feeling for the old man, but not all. After a few more mouthfuls of food, he pushed away his plate. "There's more there for your dog," he said. "I've had all I want." He stood up to carry his half-full plate around the fire and give it to the old man. The tall prospector did the same. "It's funny that," he said, scraping his plate clean onto the one his mate had given the old man. "I've had the same." He threw his plate on the truck, where it fell down amongst some shovels. "More than I want must be the flamin' heat." Stooping, he picked up his mug of tea and wandered away to the back of the truck. After a few moments, his mate joined him. The two stood drinking their tea and staring into the vast distances. Each wondered what could be said or done for the old man, but knew there was nothing. Hunched on his swag, the old man fed Blue. Fed him until both plates were empty, and all that was left was a piece of damper for the old man's meal. "He's mad," the short prospector said, "but what can you do?" "Nothing," the tall one said, "and about being mad I wouldn't know, except maybe what the bush has driven 'em to." "That's about it," the short one agreed. They drained their mugs, then tossed them onto the truck. They would wash them later, along with the plates, at the water hole. Dust was kicked over the fire, and the canvas and remaining food stowed. When the old man stood up, he passed the mug and plates to the two prospectors, then turned to lift his swag. He had it on his shoulders, and the billy and tucker bag in his hands, before he said, "Me and Blue won't forget, not now or ever. You ain't like some who'd call a man mad." The tall prospector said, "No, we wouldn't do that. We were glad, though, to give you a feed." "Yeah," the short one said. "It was good having you and your mate, Blue." He climbed up into the truck to take the wheel, while the taller man went around to the other side. Suddenly the engine roared, shattering the quietness. The two men waved, but the old man had already turned to trudge away. With Blue at his heels, he reached the track, then glanced back. The truck was speeding in the direction of the water hole. A great cloud of dust hung swirling above the track. "They're gone," the old man said. Blue looked up, feathering his tail, and the old man nodded. "Yeah," he added, "I know what you mean. They was good blokes, but talked too much. He trudged on, and Blue padded behind, close to the old man's battered boots. The old man was upright, refreshed by the tea and damper. His bloodshot eyes were again fixed in their unwavering stare toward the skyline. Man and dog seemed unaware of the searing, blinding heat. No tree or scrub cast shade along the narrow, winding track. As he trudged, the old man felt happy. There was a brightness lifting him and Blue up into a floating landscape, one where the snowy clouds were white against clear blue, and trees were in full bloom. Almond and peach trees, pink with flowery buds that fluttered to the ground. There were bamboos, too, and reeds in flowing water. Their reflections swirled where the current rippled, lapping the grassy banks. And Blue was there, walking with the old man through fallen blossoms, or splashing through the reeds. There was so much happiness that the old man reached out to pull Blue to him. Then suddenly there was only the sun flaring down and the winding, dusty track, only the horizon, where the mirages shimmered and whirly-whirlies whirled in towering columns. As if he had been far, far away, the old man whispered, "You was with me, Blue, with me all along. We were rompin' mate, running through grass and water. There were flowers, too, scattered on the ground." He wiped his eyes, and Blue looked up, sensing the old man's heart. As if locked in unending rhythm, the old man trudged on. Blue padded behind, habituated to the rise and fall of the sun-cracked boots. Toward late afternoon, a light puff of wind scurried past the old man and Blue. They scarcely felt the puff, and it was soon gone, whispering away into the quietness. Yet the old man knew there was more to follow. Easing the swag on his shoulders to a better position, he said, "We're in for it, Blue, and there ain't no signs of water. We'll camp when we see a few sticks, enough to boil the billy." It was almost dark when the two reached a gray, withered tree trunk. Time and weather had split it halfway down the middle. One half hung sideways, curled right over. Lowering his swag, the old man said, "This'll do us, Blue. We'll push on tomorrow and find a drop of water." Later, after a meal had been eaten and the plates washed, the old man leaned back, resting his shoulders against the stump. He stared into the fire. Dreamily, he imagined many pictures in the glowing embers, and slowly tears began to ooze from his eyes. Presently he whispered, "It's funny the way things are, comin' back about when I was young, I mean, you know, like the other day when I was tellin' you about me and Jenny." He sighed and pulled Blue to him. "Just then I was thinkin' about another time, a time I've tried to shut out, but it creeps back sometimes. Not often, Blue, but when it does, it's like that pain I get, and it nearly tears me in two." He paused and scuffed his eyes until they were dry. "A year or two after I'd pulled Jenny from the well, I left school. A friend of Dad's got me a job in the Homebush sale yards, and I used to ride backwards and forwards every day. By then I had a pony that I'd saved up to buy. He was a good 'un blue and dapple gray. Moonlight, I called him, because you could see him clearly at night. In my second year at work, we had a long, hot summer. You wouldn't believe it, blue, but down around them parts near Sydney, it can get real hot. So hot you can smell the pitch meltin' on the roads. It was a memory the old man had retained, and for a moment he raised his head as if he could smell the hot city streets. But you remember, we lived just outside Parramatta on a scrubby 20-acre plot that Dad'd bought cheap. There was a lot of ribby timber on it that was useless for anything except turning into charcoal for the forge. Dad used to make the charcoal himself. He'd chop down a couple of trees, then heap 'em together. When they were slowly burnin', he'd cover them with dirt and leave 'em to smolder. Took a week sometimes, but he had a stack of charcoal at the end to last him for months. The old man reached for the billy and sipped a mouthful of tea. Wiping his lips, he said, "One night I rode home after a real scorcher. I put Moonlight into his little paddock and fed him, then went into the house. You remember I told you it was only a timber-built shack, but cozy enough. Mom and Dad and Jenny were already eating, and I sat down with 'em. After tea, I decided to walk into Parramatta and see some of my old schoolmates. It's too hot to sleep, I told Mom, so I might as well catch up on a bit of visitin'. I ain't seen some of the fellers since Christmas." Mom laughed and said, "You're stretching it a bit," but she let me go. Dad didn't mind either. I left 'em and Mom playin' with Jenny before they put her to bed. He paused, deeply immersed in what he was telling. "You know, Blue, it's a funny thing, but I usually kissed Mom and Jenny before I left 'em. Yet I didn't that night. I ran out to see that Moonlight's water bucket was full. Then just shouted, 'So long, see you later,' as I went by the house. Even then no one heard me because of the laughing and talking. Jenny was a terror once you started to play games with her." He paused again as the words momentarily caught in his throat. "It was late when I came out of a friend's house and started home. I'd walked through a few streets before I noticed that the sky to the west was red with fire, purplish red flames under a deep black pall of smoke. Before I was clear of Parramatta, the local fire engine rushed past on his way to the blaze. And you know, Blue, I could hardly walk. Me legs went numb, but I forced 'em to run. I knew, Blue, as sure as I'm sittin' here, that fire was sweepin' toward home, if it hadn't already engulfed it. I ran until a neighbor came by in his sulky. He shouted at me to hop up, then flogged his horse into a gallop. We reached the scrub-bordered track that led up to the house and had to stop. The fire was ragin' in a solid wall across a wide stretch of country. A mob of men were beating at the flames, and others were pumping water, but they were like ants, Blue, trying to hold back a flood. Those scrub fires race faster than a train on its tracks. Toward dawn, a squally wind came, a southerly buster, they call it down here. After it came rain, heavy blinding sheets of it that smothered the fire. Through the wet, smoldering ashes, I trudged home, followed by the neighbors and a couple of policemen. There was nothing, Blue, nothing, only my dad's anvil and a few bits of twisted steel, tools and things, lying around the blacksmith's shop. Where the house had been was only ash. The old man reached again for the billy, but it was empty. He pushed it away, fumbling with its lid. You don't know how it feels, and you never will, Blue, to see nothing where your mom and dad and sister have been. Only ash, rifled in a heap under the pouring rain. Moonlight, too, wasn't even charred bones lying on the ground. There was nothing, Blue, nothing, only the anvil still hot from the heat that had poured over it. Nobody knew how the fire started. Maybe Dad had some charcoal burning, and a spark set the tinder hot. Scrub light, I don't know. The bush does funny things with fire, as I've seen since. Some of the neighbors offered me help and a home, but I wouldn't listen. You can't, Blue, when you're dead inside. A boy of 15, suddenly left like that, can't sort of see straight. The ache in 'em is too great. All he wants is the familiar, his roots, Blue, and they ain't there any more. The old man sighed and said no more. There was a longing in him that tightened the cords in his throat. Stretching out on his blankets, he closed his eyes. His hands reached instinctively and pulled Blue to him. The two lay together, feeling the sudden warm gusts of wind that scurried across the camp. Presently the old man slept. Sparks, leaping up from the wind-whipped fire, outlined his bony face. Toward dawn, the wind increased in force and scattered the last remnants of the fire. Ashes mingled with the dust that blew over the old man and blew. Yet the old man slept on. His weight and Blue's held down the two worn blankets. The billy and tucker bag were safe at the base of the gray dead tree. Hunched against the blast, Blue watched and waited. His dust-grimed eyes peered hopefully at the old man, but there was no movement, only the slight rise and fall of the old man's chest. Then a lull came, deathly in its quietness, as if pulled by some unseen hand. The old man awoke, then sat up. "Lor, Blue," he whispered, groping in the gritty blackness. "Why didn't yer wake me? We'll have to push on or we'll choke. We won't survive this, mate, without a drink." His voice was hoarse, yet his hands were reassuring when they fondled Blue. Blue stretched, sensing the intonations of worry in the voice, but understanding, too, the words push on. Quickly the old man rolled the billy and tucker bag in his blankets and strapped them. They were on his shoulders when the renewed blast of the wind almost tore him from his feet. Doubled over, he shouted, "Come on, mate, the track's to the right. We'll know it by the ruts underfoot." The words ripped away, lost in the roar, but Blue had no need of them. His head was already close to the old man's legs as they reeled toward the track. Buffeted and reeling, man and dog trod blindly. Eventually the old man fell. He crawled a few paces, then his hands felt a rut. He knew he had reached the track. Staggering up, he shouted, "We're right, Blue. Follow it left, and we're headin' westward." He gasped and staggered, rocked sideways by the wind, but managed to keep his feet. Blue followed blindly, more by instinct than the feel of ruts under his boots. The old man followed the track. Sometimes he veered one way, sometimes the other, yet always he managed to reel back on course. Blue likewise stayed as if glued to the old man's heels. Where they went he followed. Suddenly Blue raised his head. Instinct warned him of danger, but too late. Two blurred lights flared swiftly, then slewed away. Blue leaped ahead of the old man to protect him and smashed against a skidding tire. The impact flung him back against the old man's chest. Miraculously, man and dog hurtled sideways, clear of the spinning truck. For long moments, Mad Mick strained on the steering wheel of his mail truck to stop it from capsizing. Gradually, he brought it to a halt facing into the howling wind. Scrambling down, he groped back along the truck, until eventually he had to leave it behind. Whipped by the wind, he edged forward in search of whatever he had struck. An inner sense told him it was man or animal, but he wasn't sure. And Mad Mick was a man who liked to be sure. It was one of the factors in his mail contract. He had to be on time at certain points, yet he had to have a safety record. And this safety record was something Mad Mick was proud of. He drove thousands of miles yearly over impossible country at even more impossible speeds, and to date he had never had an accident. He had bumped trees, shorn sides off sheds, and ripped away the rails of a bridge, but never hurt man or animal. Searching mostly with his feet, he found the old man and Blue near the side of the track. Dust was already piling against them when he knelt to run his hands over their bodies. Both were limp as Mad Mick felt them all over. "The dog's dead," he said, pulling Blue to one side. Mad Mick was no sentimentalist. To him a dog was a dog, and there it ended. If one died, there was always another to take its place. So he bothered no more with Blue. With the old man, Mad Mick was more careful. He examined the body and limbs expertly, and his hands told him that the body and limbs were old. They told him, too, that no bones were broken, and there was still life. The old man's lips were parted. Breathing in the dust-filled air, his heart was beating, though very irregularly. Standing up, Mad Mick wondered what to do. Leave the old man and send someone back for him, or take him along on the back of the truck. Mad Mick decided on the latter course. If he stays, he thought, gasping as the wind howled against him, he'll die for sure. The dust would bury him, or clog up his mouth. On the truck, I can shove something over his head." He knelt down again for a final check over the old man. Finding nothing new, Mad Mick dragged the old man to the back of the truck. An unseen rising sun was beginning to lighten the pitch darkness, but not enough to see clearly by. Within moments, despite the screaming wind, Mad Mick had the old man lying between the sacks and boxes lashed to the truck's sides. They were stores of freight that had yet to be delivered. For a pillow, the old man had his tattered blanket roll. Obeying a last thought, Mad Mick wedged a broken packing case over the old man's face to ward off dust. "It's rough," Mad Mick said, climbing in behind the steering wheel, "but it does. The thing is, he won't blow away." Easing the truck around in low gear, he peered ahead for the track. When the blurred headlights showed a small stretch, he changed gear again. Soon the truck was in top gear, swaying violently as the wind slammed against its sides. Hunched over the wheel, Mad Mick saw only the small well of light from the headlights and a few feet of track. Beyond was always a wall of choking, blinding dust filled with uncertainty. Somewhere, too, as the first stop, were the two prospectors. Mad Mick stared, hoping to see them. He wanted help in saving the old man. Behind, near the track, Blue lay unheeding. Dust drifted over him, blown by the wind.